Hello, a very good afternoon to all the participants from India and a good morning to all our participants who are joining us from the Netherlands. Today, along with next time, we at the Consulate General of the Kingdom of the Netherlands present to you a webinar on the implementation of the MLI and its impact on the cross-border transactions. Before we begin, I will briefly introduce you to our Consul General, Mr. Guido Tillman. Mr. Tillman has been the Consul General of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Mumbai and has started his tenure in the year 2016 in October. He's completing his 4 years now. And after several years of work in the diplomatic corps in China, Macedonia, Brussels, he's then come to Mumbai. And in the area of expertise, he has in building of bilateral relations in the area of economic, political affairs, public and cultural diplomacy. He's also played a significant part in this role in every country that he's worked on. May I now request our Consul General, Mr. Guido Tillman, to kickstart this session?
Yeah. Okay. Am I audible? Can everybody hear me? I guess you can.
Yes.
A few preliminary remarks from my side. This is the first time that I'm actually participating in a webinar. The current COVID crisis obviously has necessitated all of us to communicate electronically. We've been able to do so with the colleagues of the Consulate General, but also with the colleagues of the other diplomatic missions that we have here in India, and that works really well. FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, MS Teams. This is the first time that I'm doing a webinar, so I'm a little bit ill at ease, not really sure how these things pan out. But I think that if there is one, let's say, positive element that may come out of this COVID crisis, and again, I'm saying this really tentatively and reluctantly, because the situation is such that it is indeed a dramatic situation. But again, looking at the bright side, I think that one of the low-hanging fruits that we can reap from this COVID crisis is that webinars like this can be held more often. Previously, all of you would have actually taken your car or taken public transport and would have gone to a hotel or to another venue, to get it together, thereby obviously emitting CO2. Even worse, people would actually fly in for events like this. And what the COVID crisis has shown us, and is showing us while we speak, is that this actually works, electronically conferencing. So I think that's a really good thing. So the first time that I'm doing a webinar, I have, as you may see, wearing a official shirt, but I'm going to be really open and don't leak it to the press. I'm right now sitting in my dining room. The doors are open. It's really hot outside. The monsoon rains are pouring down. So from above, you will see me in my official shirt, but from below, I'm actually wearing shorts. But please don't divulge it to anybody else. The other personal remark that I'm going to make is that this is my first webinar, but it's also going to be my last webinar and actually my last public appearance, because I am leaving. I'm leaving on Wednesday. I've got the night flight to Amsterdam, as Alpa just mentioned. I've been in now for 4 years, and my tour of duty is over. So very unfortunately, I will have to leave Mumbai on Wednesday. I had a wonderful journey for 4 years. I think that also goes for my wife here in this beautiful city. We actually also had a little baby boy born here in Mumbai, our first one. So we will not only take Mumbai with us in our heart, but we will take even a little Mumbai car with us to wherever we go. So these were let's say, the preliminary remarks from my side. Now coming to the subject matter of the webinar, and I'm going to tease the accountants amongst us a little bit, because accountants are the same as lawyers. You can't live with them, but you can't live without them. They make things so extremely complicated. I know that as a government official, we are also, let's say, at the beginning of why things are so complicated, but I'm just going to read one of the articles that was in the presentation that was sent to me. And it goes like this, and I wonder how many of you can actually understand what is mentioned here. I have no clue what this means. It says, PPT under the MLI is broader in ambit than the general anti-avoidance rule GAAR under IDLT, as the latter gets triggered only if the main purpose of the arrangement is to obtain a tax benefit. It could be used to deny DTAA benefits for many arrangements, and it goes on and it goes on and it goes on with so many technical terms, with so many acronyms that for me, it is really to comprehend what is at stake. Now, being a simple government official, I know obviously that what is at stake is whether companies are paying their taxes, varieties of taxes where the taxes are due. And the way that the tax treaty system worldwide has now been organized is that there are instances, quite a few instances, where taxes are not paid where they are due. I also think that the Netherlands played a role in that for certain reasons, which I will not comment upon, because then this webinar will tend to become really political, and that's what I want to avoid. I do want to state, though, that the Netherlands recently has been very proactive in trying to fill in the gaps in the international taxation regime, and we've been one of the front runners, one of the proactive participants in the BEPS project. I'm really happy that I actually know what BEPS means. I think it means I forgot actually. It's profit-based, whatever, shifting, and it's it's a project that was initiated by the OECD, and in which the Netherlands government was also extremely proactive. The results of the BEPS project. Nishan, what does BEPS mean again? Base eroding, profit shifting, right?
Sharing.
That's it.
Yeah.
Profit sharing. Shifting or sharing? Shifting. Okay. All right. So what I do understand is that the BEPS project resulted in various outcomes that now have been encompassed in the various multilateral instruments. And I think that that is exactly the subject matter that we are going to discuss today. I also know that beyond the BEPS project and the multilateral instruments, the Dutch government, the current administration is also very keen on looking at various other loopholes that may need to be filled up. And one of the main issues that the government is looking at now is the principle of substance. If money flows to the Netherlands through holding companies or what have you, to what extent can we really say that the entity in the Netherlands operating in the Netherlands has a certain level of substance that would allow it to tap into the various taxation facilities. Again, I guess I have proven here that I am very much a lay person in the wondrous world of taxation, but I'm really happy that we have two experts with us that will be able to enlighten us and will be able to guide us, especially when it comes down to the MLIs implemented in between the Netherlands and India. We will have here at the seminar Nishan Bam. I hope that I pronounced your name correctly, Nishan.
Yes.
It's Nishat, by the way, with a T. You had the finance and accounting function at Dacos.
Yes.
Dacos is one of the, let's say, the important Dutch companies active here in India. We work together with you closely. I even visited your company and I also met some of your Dutch colleagues. So really great that you've organized together with Nishit this event. Nishant is a chartered accountant with 14+ years of experience in areas of financial management, MIS reporting, budgeting and variance analysis. Nishant has worked with Bajaj Finance during his initial career days. He also has a unique experience of starting up a center of US-based company in Pune and ramping up the company to 500+ employees within a period of 2 years. That's not bad at all, Nishant. Currently at Dacos, he works closely with the management team and is involved in strategic analysis, long-range planning for creating a path for future with respect to changes happening in business environment. Again, great that you're here, Nishant, and it'll be really interesting to hear your views on the subject matter at hand. The second speaker of today is Nishit Parikh. I hope that I pronounced your name correctly, Nishit.
Yeah.
Nishit is currently partner for direct taxation regulatory services at Sudit K. Parekh & Co. You're practicing as a chartered accountant. You've done that now for already 13 years. And you're advising several domestic and international corporates on matters related to international tax, FEMA, and structuring of inbound and outbound investment. Nishit has authored and published numerous articles on a variety of topics, and he also speaks at various industry forums. So I think, gentlemen, I would leave the floor to you. Just maybe a news flash that most of you will have read. The previously Dutch-British combination Unilever has now decided to become a solely British-based company. Probably that will take a while before that transformation has been realized. It would be interesting also to hear from both of you what that may generate in terms of, let's say, the tax effects for India, for the Netherlands, and for the UK. I'm not sure whether that is something that you can already pronounce yourself on, but I think it would be really interesting to hear from you what kind of effect that may have, given the fact that Unilever is one of the biggest multinationals in the world. All right, I have to leave in approximately 15 to 20 minutes. I have time until 3 o'clock-ish, and that really is due to the fact that I have to organize my departure. There are no removal companies yet activated operational in Mumbai, so I have to do everything myself. So I'm afraid that I would have to leave you in 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you so much all for being here. I can only see the speakers, but guys, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Guido, and we wish you all the very best for your travel back to Netherlands. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you all are doing fine amid this pandemic period. I would like to thank the Consulate General and the Nextdime team for providing us this opportunity to speak on the topic of foreign remittances and associated challenges. While working in the corporate environment for the last 14 years, what we have realized is one of the things that whenever it comes on the floor makes us think is foreign outward payment. Like working in this era of globalization and working for MNCs, most of the time we come across situation dealing with fund outflow, and this is different when it comes to remitting the funds outside India. Talking particularly payment of dividend to foreign investors, payment of royalty and commission, payment of interest on foreign borrowing, and payment of professional fees. All these items are like where we are making the outward remittance. In all these cases, we need to understand various provisions related to income tax and FEMA, and we have to comply with them to be eligible for taking the tax benefit. To discuss this further, I would like to showcase a current situation on the slide. Nishit, if you can move. Yes. So background and our corporate standing today, India is a preferred destination for foreign investors, mainly due to the favorable tax treaty India has with many countries. Now, once we have this favorable tax treaties in line, we also have increase in import due to the growth in economic activity, due to India being a global business hub. We are importing both material as well as services. While doing both this exports and imports, we face various issues, and particularly talking in this session, the issues are with regards to foreign transactions where we are supposed to send the money out of India. Government is constantly updating the laws and rules to regulate this type of transactions. At the same time, compliance issues with increasing complexity, it gets difficult for corporates to make sure that transactions are in compliance with law, and to make sure we are in line with law as well as complying with things, we need to have adequate knowledge. With the ever changing rule, it becomes difficult to cope up with this, to cope up with the changes. Now, coming more closer to the practical problem, in normal course of business, we encounter various issues while we deal with foreign payments. Particularly talking about coming from the accountancy background, whenever there is a contract that is being taken up by a company, it is the business team who leads the contract discussion and contract closure. Subsequently, the contract comes to the accounts team for discussion or their review, and it is at that point of time we realize that there are certain things in the contract which make it vulnerable to remain in compliance with law. Uh, Practically, we all face this situation that business team enters into the contract. Once the tax team gives its view on the contract, the business team comes across a situation where it sees that there will be reduction in receipts because of applicable taxes in India. At the same time, dealing with multiple countries, business team also are not sure about the tax deduction rates, and all this leads to subsequent adjustment which we have to do in terms of either the purchase order, the invoices, or even at many a times in the base contract. And these are some of the practical business issues which we have to face time and again. Next slide, Nishit. Yeah. Again, while making foreign outward payment in particular, we see that immediate payments for foreign vendors like domestic vendors is expected. We have to be all aware of this, that unlike a payment to a domestic vendor, making the payment to foreign vendor is a bit more lengthy process because we have to complete the entire process of following the RBI guidelines. Now, there are some last minute notifications about international payments which we get, which further delays or which further, by being taken by surprise, it takes some more time. Many a times payments are expected without tax deduction. This is one of the main problem which we face like every now and then. With regards to countries, there is, I can say, a bit less of certainty and uniformity in the same type of transactions, like transactions with regards to US, with regards to United Kingdom, with regards to Netherlands, all will have certain different provisions which we need to follow. Then there are certain challenges when we talk about the type of the payment. For example, with commission, the clause and the rates are different. For professional fees, for royalties, with all of this, there are different rates which we need to follow for tax deduction. As mentioned in like last slide, there are differences between the tax team and business teams, which further increases the problem. All this put together are the issues which we as corporates face day in and day out while dealing with in international transactions. So to explain this further, we will be moving to Nishit, like how can we be more certain while making this international transactions. Nishit, over to you.
Thank you, Nishant. So good afternoon, everyone. So now through the course of next 30-35 minutes, I will first take you through what are the relevant provisions for withholding tax which are important to understand, and then what is actually MLI and how it is going to impact your life as a corporate or as a professional, what kind of additional checks and balances you will have to build in an already complicated system, which Nishant already explained as to there could be various level of hassles in internally coordinating. That was more on the business side of it, but then even while determining the tax rate, there could be further complications. So section 195 of the Indian Income Tax Act governs the withholding tax provisions in India. And the key objective of this provision was mainly twofold. One was to collect the taxes at the earliest point in time, and also to ensure that tomorrow government should not have any issues in collecting money from a non-resident, since the reach of the government may be limited in terms of reaching out to a non-resident. So with these two major objectives, the provisions were introduced, and whereby the onus was kept on the payer or the Indian party to deduct taxes. And in order to ensure that appropriate compliances are happening and to have a right kind of check and balances, the compliances were introduced. So one, the law requires the payment while making any payment, you need to withhold taxes, and not only withhold taxes, but you also need to do certain compliances, whereby you need to take a certificate from a chartered accountant who will certify the withholding tax rate, or if it's not taxable, he will certify that why this payment is not taxable with reasons. Then as a company also, you need to give a declaration under Form 15CA, and along with other banking documents, all this documentation is to be ready before actually the remittance happens. And if you go slightly deep dive into the section is very stringent, and it says that any person being a resident or a non-resident making payment to a non-resident which is chargeable to tax under the Income Tax Act at the time of payment of credit, whichever is earlier, will deduct tax at rates in force. So here there are three very important points which I would like to discuss. So it says any person being a resident or a non-resident. So this means that even when a non-resident is making payment to a non-resident which is chargeable to tax in India, then there would be a withholding requirement. So to give you an example, if a non-resident has a permanent establishment in India, which is considered as a non-resident for income tax purpose, and if that permanent establishment is making any payment outside of India, it would be obliged to comply with Section 195 provisions, and it would be obliged to withhold taxes, take a certificate from a chartered accountant. Then the rates of deductions are rates in force. Again, rates in force has been defined under the law. Rates in force has been defined to mean the tax rate applicable as per the Indian Income Tax Act, or the tax rate provided under the respective tax treaties, whichever is beneficial. So I can apply the rate of the treaty or of the Income Tax Act, whichever is beneficial to the payee, that is a vendor to whom I am making the payment. From a compliance perspective, there are certain exemptions which have been provided, or exceptions which have been provided. By and large, not big kind of exemptions, but yeah, some kind of relief has been provided, whereby if you are making payment to a particular vendor and during the course of the entire year, the payment is going to be less than INR 0.5 million, that is 5 lakh rupees, then you need not take a 15 CB from a chartered accountant, but you can remit the money by filling up Part A of Form 15CA at a company level itself. Further, if the payee or you yourself has obtained a nil withholding or a lower withholding tax order from the income tax website, then obviously you don't need a chartered accountant certificate, because you've already got the tax rate verified or vetted from the tax authorities, and there also you can remit the money by using Part B of Form 15CA. In respect of Part D of 15CA is required in cases where the payments are not taxable under the Income Tax Act, not under the treaty, but are not taxable under the Income Tax Act only. Then again 15CB is not required. You can make the remittances only using Part D of Form 15CA. So your typical cases could be some reimbursement of your stay, visit, and stuff like that, which are not taxable at all. Then lastly, if an individual is making payment for certain personal use, then again there is no requirement of 15CA or 15CB, subject to that payments not falling under RBI approval rule. Moving on, so for typically for a corporate, now the process for determining the tax rate would be first to look at the documents which it has collected from the vendor, the agreements, the purchase order, and determine what is the exact nature of the payments, whether it is royalty, fees for technical services, commission like Nishan said, business income, dividend income, and basis that determine what is the category it falls into, and then check whether all the tax related documents are available or not, like a PAN number is available. If not, there is a penal rate provided. Then tax residency certificate is available or not to claim the benefit of the tax treaty. Form 10F, 37BC declaration, all of that has been provided or not. Basis that, check whether the payment is taxable under the Income Tax Act. If the answer is yes, then check what is the tax rate to be applied. After you do that, you go to the tax treaty and determine what is the tax rate for the same line or for the same nature of income under the tax treaty, and compare both of that and apply whichever is beneficial to the to the recipient. In addition to this, from 1st of April 2020, you will, along with the DTAA, you will also have to look at whether multilateral instrument provisions are applicable to the particular double tax avoidance agreement. If yes, whether it changes any interpretation of the tax treaties, and then apply those rates. Why this is important? Because there are huge consequences. So today, if you don't do this kind of compliances properly, then there is a penalty for furnishing of inaccurate particulars under section 271I, which provides for a penalty of 100,000 rupees or 1 lakh rupees for furnishing incorrect 15CA or 15CB. Nowadays, I've seen that in the tax assessment proceedings, foreign remittance payments have become a very hot topic for the assessing officers. They like to verify for each company what are the foreign remittances they have made, whether compliances have been carried out properly, whether taxes have been deducted appropriately or not. In case there are any discrepancies, then the tax officer can straight away disallow the expenditure which is incurred. And once the disallowance happens, there could be interest and penal implication on non-withholding of taxes. In addition to that, there could be also 201 proceedings for non-deduction of tax. So there are huge consequences, and hence this entire exercise for corporate becomes very important to follow appropriately. Now coming to impact of MLI.
Nishit, can I intervene here?
Sure.
I really need to go. It's exactly 3 o'clock now, so I have to bid farewell to the participants of this this webinar, to your good selves, and again in 2 days from now also to Mumbai. Thank you so much for having me. Good luck with the rest of the seminar, and yeah, stay safe and healthy. Bye bye all.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Kitu.
Bye bye.
So coming to the next topic of MLI, why there was a need of a BEPS project, or as rightly pointed out by Guido, that BEPS is base erosion profit shifting project, which was initiated by OECD along with G20 countries. So why there was a need for so many countries to come together? So if you remember, this project started somewhere in 2013, and before that also there were a lot of reported cases whereby huge or large multinationals were reported or were alleged to have done aggressive tax planning or tax structuring, which led to revenue loss for many countries. And more countries were realizing that large corporates in our own country are creating structures in such a manner that they are not paying tax anywhere, and ultimately their major profits or reserves remain in a tax haven kind of a country. And also all these tax treaties and international tax laws have been created hundreds of years before. So they have not caught up in terms of the law, has not caught up with the economic reality, whereby now buying something from US on a website has become very common even in India. So for corporate world, doing cross-border transaction, digital transactions have become very simple, and it's in a way become a way of life. Nobody had envisaged that a US company would sell goods in India through an online website while drafting the income tax law in 19th century. So because of that, people were feeling that there is a lot of tax avoidance, and hence there is requirement of countries to come together and do something about it. So the project started in July 2013 and it got concluded only in July 2017, whereby the key objective or the key findings of the project were laid down in 2015, whereby the BEPS committee came out with many action plan, where one of the action plan, that is action plan 15, was where all the countries decided that it would be a humongous exercise for each country to agree on certain things and go into negotiation for the tax treaties. So if India starts negotiating treaties with other countries, and similarly other countries start doing that, there were around 3,000 treaties which were required to be negotiated. So they felt it was impossible to do that task, and to provide an easier option, they introduced a common instrument known as multilateral instrument. They said that if both the countries sign the MLI, and then there is a process on how it will become applicable, which we will discuss in subsequent slide. But at a very layman level, if both the countries agree to apply MLI, then that treaty has to be read in addition to the MLI provisions which are provided in a document, which again has 16 articles, and you have to read each article along with your tax treaty. So that was how the MLI was created, and that's what MLI would mean. But I would also like to highlight that the committee had recommended many other measures, which either there was not a consensus between the countries, as to all the countries were not agreeing on that, and also BEPS team realized that this requires more work to come out with finer aspects on digital economy, on related party transactions. So what they did, they suggested certain measures or anti-avoidance measures which countries can adopt on their own in the domestic laws. So for example, they had suggested equalization levy for digital transactions. So India in 2016 as a domestic measure came out with equalization levy based on this recommendation. They also suggested of having significant economic provisions, significant economic presence provisions in the respective laws. So India came up with SEP provisions in the domestic tax law. Similarly, India came up with 94B provisions, which provides for disallowance of interest in case of related party loans. OECD project had also suggested 3-tier documentation for transfer pricing, and India has implemented that. And now, as you would be aware, you need to file your local file, master file, CBCR, and all of that while you are doing your transfer pricing exercise. So these were some of the measures which were not introduced under MLI, but the countries were free to adopt it on their domestic tax laws. With all this, in 2017, the first signing ceremony happened, whereby countries had to come up with the tax positions on MLI, which countries they want to apply this with. And that's how India finally signed the MLI on June 2019. So once you have signed or submitted your MLI document for ratification, there is a process on how it will come into effect. So mainly there are two important events. One is entry into force and one is entry into effect. Entry into force would mean that once you ratify or you submit your instrument, then 3 calendar months after the date of submission would be the date of entry into force for your country. So since India submitted on 25th of June 2019, July, August, September, 1st of October is considered as entry into force. Then they said that for entry into effect, you need to look at two things. One is when this MLI will apply for withholding tax, and when this MLI will apply for other taxes. So in respect of withholding tax, they said that once your document has entered into force, for withholding tax purposes, it will start immediately from the next taxable year which your country has. So after 1st October 2019, since India's next taxable year comes on 1st of April 2020, most of the India's tax treaty will have MLI provisions applicable from 1st of April 2020. For other taxes, it said that you need to look at the taxable year beginning after 6 months of entry into force. So in India's case, India had planned it in such a manner that that date also will come to 1st of April 2020. I'll explain how. So 1st October 2019 is entry into force. So if I take 6 months, October, November, December, Jan, Feb, March. So these are the 6 months, and the taxable event beginning after date of entry into force is 1st of April 2020. But instead of this 1st October, if it would have been 1st November, then it would have gone to 1st April 2021. So we have taken one 1st November example to make you understand better. So if you look at India-Norway tax treaty, India, as I mentioned, has entered into force on 1st of October 2019. But since Norway deposited its instrument only in July 2019, its entry into force came on 1st of November 2019. And you have to take the later date of both the countries for entry into effect. So it is 1st of November 2019 for India, Norway. And for withholding of taxes, it is next taxable year. So for India, it remains 1st of April 2020, and for Norway, it remains 1st of January 2020, which is the taxable year for Norway. However, since it is 1st November, there comes the change in other taxes. So the relevant date for entry into effect for other taxes. So if you count 6 months from November, it comes to November, December, January, February, March, April. So after 30th of April 2020, the first taxable year beginning would be 1st of April 2021 for India and 1st of January 2021 for Norway. So your typical question or confusion or no clear direction is available as to why these two dates have been provided. One of the possible reason is that unlike India, many countries don't have withholding tax provisions or have very limited withholding tax provisions, and hence the intent of the law could be that only for certain types of income where withholding is applicable, it should begin from 1st of April 2020, and for other income it should come into picture only after 1st April of 2021. However, from an India perspective, in my view, my personal view is that in India, any payment which you make to a non-resident, you are liable to withhold taxes. And for us, for all practical purposes, for India-Norway tax treaty, the date has to be 1st of April 2020, and 1st of April 2021 would become academic for us, and it would be of no use. Because otherwise there would be a situation whereby for withholding tax, I will apply 1st of April 2020, I'll start applying taxes from 1st of April 2020. And as the recipient, he will say that no, for me, it is applicable from 1st of April 2021. So I will claim refund of taxes, which would become very futile exercise for the government. And I cannot believe that can be the intention. So in my view, 1st of April 2020 should be the date for India for all payments, whether it is withholding or others. And that should be applied unless there is some clarification from OECD or the Indian government in this regard. From a Netherlands perspective also, Netherlands actually had deposited the instrument on 29th of March 2019. So that was before India. So 1st of October would become the entry into force, and both the dates would come to 1st of April 2020. So from an India-Netherlands perspective, it is applicable from 1st of April 2020. So from a impact perspective, currently 30 tax treaties which India has are getting impacted or changed because of MLI from 1st of April 2020. So these are many popular countries, many European countries: Austria, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Finland, Netherlands, all of that are getting impacted. Again, there are many countries who have not been part of the project itself, and the biggest of all is USA. USA has not been part of the BEPS project, so nothing changes for USA, and for all the other treaties, wherever it has been notified, it will change. So from a very basic concept on MLI, that how does MLI work? So as I mentioned, applicability is not automatic. Both the countries have to notify each other as a covered tax agreement. So like, to give you an example, India has to select a partner saying that, okay, I want to apply this MLI provisions to this country, this country, this country. And the other country has to accept India by saying that I also want to apply this with India. So it's kind of a matchmaking. Both the parties have to agree. So like usual, India has applied this to all its tax treaties. So from India perspective, they want to apply it to all the tax treaties which it has. But there are many countries which have not accepted India as a covered tax agreement. The prominent names being Germany as well as Mauritius, who have not considered India as a covered tax agreement. While India has considered them as covered tax agreement, but they have not considered India as a covered tax agreement. So nothing changes for Mauritius and Germany from a MLI perspective, just to give you an example. So someone may ask whether tax treaties become redundant. No, answer is no. In fact, this MLI provisions has to be read along with the tax treaty provisions, as I mentioned in the start. Again, once these changes are implemented, whether nothing will happen, no. All the countries have right to do any changes which they want. So in fact, tomorrow Germany can come and say, okay, I've changed my mind. I want India to be considered as a covered tax agreement. Same with Mauritius. Or India may come and say that, okay, I don't want to consider Netherlands as my partner or as a covered tax agreement. Then nothing would apply. So it is very fungible. People or countries can change how MLI has to be applied. So my advice to everyone is that you need to look at the position at the time when you are doing a transaction and not rely on some old presentation, because something could have changed in the recent past which you would not be able to gauge from an old presentation. Similarly, not only the treaties but even the MLI has a concept of minimum standard and not a minimum standard, whereby there are certain minimum standards which all countries have to accept, whereas there are certain standards which are not minimum standard, which again country has to choose whether he wants to apply that or not, which we will discuss in the later part of the presentation. Someone may ask how to interpret MLI. So again, it's an international tax law. So OECD has already released international tax commentary on MLI provisions. So those commentaries and normal principle of interpretation for an international tax law would equally apply. Now coming to an overview of articles of MLI. So like treaty, MLI also has various articles which are there. So if you look at Article 1, which is scope of MLI, it talks about where it is applicable, what you can do with MLI, which we discussed. Second article is again interpretation of terms or definitions, as we call it. Article 3 is on transparent entities. So transparent entities would mean that there are many countries like UK and other European countries whereby a partnership firm or a LLC has the right either to get taxed at the company or at the partnership level, or they can have a pass-through status whereby the income would be ultimately taxed in the hands of the partners and not in the hands of the entity. So here there were large issues as to whether what would happen that in many cases when you were making payment to UK partnership or partnership and you realize that none of the partners are actually resident of UK, then whether you are obliged to give a tax treaty benefit or not, because that partnership is a resident of UK but the partners are not resident of the UK partnership. So that was creating a lot of controversy, and MLI provision says that in such a cases the tax benefit should be limited to the income which is getting taxed in UK. But you need not worry about this a lot, because India has made reservation on this article. So for India, this article does not apply on any tax treaty. So since it was not a minimum standard, India could make a reservation on that, and India has chose not to apply this article to all of its tax treaty. Article 4 is on dual resident entities. So here there was a confusion that if a particular company is a resident of both the countries, or sorry, more than one country, one is because of its place of incorporation and one is because its head and brain is situated in another country, then how to determine the residential status? So here the MLI provision says that you have to go to a mutual agreement process to determine the residency of the company, and the MAP authorities will take into considerations like factors into consideration like where is the place of effective management of that company, where is the head and brain of the company sitting, where is the key management and control personnel are sitting, and basis that they will decide on the residency of the company. But unfortunately, it also says that till the time it is decided that where this company is a resident, the tax treaty benefit should be denied. So it could lead to a huge problematic situation. India has accepted this clause. Article 5 talks about application of methods for elimination of double taxation. So basically this article talks about the tax credit to be given to various countries who are paying taxes in India, as to how the tax credit mechanism will work in those countries, and they have given 2 to 3 methods which can be applied by all the countries. Again, I'm not getting into detail of Article 5 because India has placed its reservation. So this article is not applicable for Indian treaties. It just says that we like to go with the existing treaty methods whereby India has a credit rule whereby they grant credit. So for Article 5 again is not applicable to the Indian treaties. Now moving on to Article 6, it is one of the Article 6 and 7 are a minimum standard articles, that is whoever is part of this MLI project cannot say that I don't want this article. They have to compulsorily have this article. So Article 6 is a minimum standard and which talks about purpose of a covered tax agreement. So MLI says that each and every tax treaty should define what is the purpose of this agreement, and that purpose should clearly bring out that treaty is not intended to create opportunities for tax avoidance. It is only for the purpose of protecting a company from double taxation. So it should not create situation which may result in tax benefits, undue tax benefits, or double non-taxation and those kind of situations. So every treaty which is under MLI would now have that preamble embedded through the MLI, that this treaty is not intended to take tax benefit, but it is only to avoid double taxation. Article 7 is a principal purpose test which our speaker earlier while introduction was mentioning, that it is more draconian than GAAR, that is GAAR provisions, and I will take you through that. I have a separate slide on this as it's a very important provision. Same way Article 8 I am covering in the latest slide. Article 9 talks about indirect transfer of immovable property. So again, MLI says that when you are transferring shares of a company and actually that company of which shares you are transferring does not have anything but only has an immovable property, that means indirectly you are transferring immovable property, and hence Article 9 would come into picture and it would not be considered as sale of shares, but it would be considered as sale of immovable property. And also they have added the clause on number of days on which the property was held and when the shares are transferred to be looked at. Article 10 talks about anti-abuse rule for PE in third jurisdiction. So this is a very nice clause or very complicated clause to understand, but it says that when you are creating a permanent establishment in a third jurisdiction to claim benefits, then that benefits would not be available to you if the tax rate in the third jurisdiction is less than the tax rate by 60% of the home jurisdiction. So to give you an example, a UK company creates a permanent establishment, that is a branch office in UAE, and through that structure it is structuring the transactions in such a manner that it is able to claim tax treaty benefits of UAE, and because of that tax treaty benefits in such a manner that overall tax liability for the group is reducing, then because of this provision, now the benefits would not be available because tax rate in UAE is 0, which is obviously less than 60% of the tax rate in UK. Article 11 talks about parties' right to tax its own residents. So it says that while we are doing all of these provisions, but if there are many countries which have rights created on the tax resident of their country to tax in, so those rights would not be diluted by MLI. So for example, there is a taxation rule which many countries adopt known as CFC rule. So India has POEM, not CFC, but there is a CFC rule that whereby an Indian government can invoke CFC rule and say that Indian companies having subsidiaries outside of India which are not earning any active income, but what they are earning are only passive income, that CFC's income would be taxed in India. So in those cases, India may impose some taxation on those companies in India. So they are saying that by MLI, we are nowhere restricting those rights. The countries can continue doing that. Article 12, 13, 14, 15 are on the permanent establishment and the changes made under permanent establishment. Again, I have covered them in my subsequent slides and I will take it up very quickly. 16 and 17 article of MLI is mainly on how the MAP process would work for different countries and how it should be done and how corresponding adjustments would be made. So what happens with all these articles becoming applicable? What is the impact on you as a corporate or you as a professional? So as we discussed that MLI provisions wherever applicable apply even where a transaction is of a single rupee. So you may have to check it even for $100 transaction or a $1 million transaction. So you need to be very critical, analyze the applicability of the tax treaty, then analyze the applicability of the MLI, then analyze the applicability of the relevant clause. And there may be certain clauses like permanent establishment, principal purpose test, which are more fact-based exercise. And as a payer, you may not be able to actually decide whether the position of the pay. So in those cases, what are the typical documentation you should build as a company, what kind of declaration you should build, whether for high value transaction you should have representation, warranties, if you have any doubts on a transaction, how to approach that. All of that becomes very, very important for the companies to decide now because it is already applicable. We are in June and it's applicable from 1st of April. So if you've not done that kind of preparation, you need to engage with consultants, with your tax teams and figure out how we are solving this, because right now you may not face any challenges, but after 2-3 years when the world would be talking about MLI at the time of assessment, you may face the pressure, and that time tracing the vendors to get the declaration would become a very, very difficult exercise. Coming to Article 7, which is a PPT test, that is the principal purpose test. So their MLI provision says that they have provided 3 options to the countries that you need to either apply one of them in your tax treaties. One is to have a principal purpose test in your tax treaty, or have a principal purpose test along with simplified limitation of benefit clause, or have a detailed limitation of benefit clause. So currently India has opted for a principal purpose test, and India has stated as one of its objective that it has opted principal purpose test as an interim measure, and it will negotiate all the treaties to come to a situation whereby a principal purpose test as well as a limitation of benefit, simplified limitation of benefit clause is applicable. So principal purpose test, what do you mean by a principal purpose test? So principal purpose test states that it can deny tax treaty benefits in every case where it is possible to conclude that one of the principal purpose of the arrangement or the transaction was to obtain a tax benefit directly or indirectly. So if because of the principal purpose test, tomorrow I find that some transaction, one of the main purpose, not the main purpose, but one of the main purpose was to claim tax treaty benefit, I can deny the entire tax treaty benefit. Again, as we mentioned, it is very, very draconian, because if you remember the Indian GAR provision, which is on similar lines, it says that where the principal purpose or where the main purpose is to claim tax benefits, then only GAR would be applicable. Plus, GAR also provides a limit that if the tax benefit is more than 30 million, that is 3 crores, then only we will invoke GAR. But PPT can be invoked even for a single rupee. So that's why we were saying that PPT is even more draconian than GAR, and hence it becomes very important for the company to have the right kind of declaration, because they may not be able to understand why a vendor has set up in a particular manner, what is his legal structure, how it is set up, whether it has multiple holding companies, where is it head and brain, because you can't ask all this question to your vendor. But what you can do is that have appropriate declarations as well as appropriate documentation on your end to protect yourself. Article 8 talks about dividend transfer transactions. Dividend transfer transaction mainly was irrelevant for us because it talked about taxation of dividend. Until 31st March of 2020, we all thought that dividend is not taxable, so I need not bother about this. But with 1st of April 2020, Indian law has undergone a change, whereby now dividend is taxable in the hands of shareholder. DDT has been abolished. So what has happened now is that you need to look at tax treaty when you are paying dividend to a foreign company. In those cases, you need to look at whether the foreign company is a beneficial owner, whether the minimum shareholding criteria provided under the tax treaty is satisfied by the shareholder. In addition to that, you need to look at MLI. MLI says that in order to give benefit of the tax rate provided under the treaty, you don't only have to look at beneficial ownership and the minimum shareholding, but you also need to look at whether he was holding shares for 365 days or not. So it becomes very, very important to look at MLI. Luckily, not many countries have accepted this clause. India has applied this clause to all treaties except for Portugal. So you would be thinking why India is so helpful to Portugal. Actually, it is the other way around. This minimum holding period is 365 days, and India-Portugal treaty provides for 2 years holding period. So that's why they have not changed that, because that is even more draconian than what MLI is providing. But India has proposed for all the treaties. Obviously, all the countries have not accepted this, but some of the major countries which would have an impact, who have also accepted this clause, is that Canada, Denmark, Serbia, Slovenia, Slovak Republic. So if you have shareholders in these countries, MLI would have an impact on you. So while declaring dividend, you need to have a look at that. So now coming to permanent establishment articles, Article 12 was on dependent agent P. So whereby the law said that if you have an agent in India, a foreign company having agent in India who is helping a foreign company selling goods in India, then it would be considered as a dependent agent P in cases where that agent is habitually concluding contracts on behalf of the principal, or the agent is maintaining stock of goods in India on behalf of the principal, or agent is habitually securing order on behalf of the principal. So earlier this was the law. Now the definition has been expanded under MLI, and on reading of it, it appears that now it will not only apply to goods, but it will also apply to services. Also, they have said that he should not be habitually concluding contract, but if he is even playing a principal role, which ultimately leads to conclusion of contract, then also he would be considered as a dependent agent, permanent establishment for the foreign company in India. In this case, again, what has happened is that many treaties have not accepted it, but many countries like Japan, Norway, Spain, Turkey have accepted this. Availability of specific activity exemption is earlier when someone was performing a preparatory and auxiliary activity in India, the same was considered as not having a permanent establishment in India, as it was doing a preparatory auxiliary activity. But now MLI provision says that you just don't look at the activity, you look at the activity in comparison to the overall business of the company, And if in context of overall business of the entity, if that activity is considered as preparatory and auxiliary, then only you give the benefit. Otherwise, that exemption would not be available. The treaty partners which have accepted this is Israel, Italy, Netherlands, Japan. Again, from a project P perspective, there were many cases whereby people were, so typically a project P is constituted if a particular project runs for more than 6 months or 183 days in India. So what people were doing, that they were splitting up the contracts into different years, or was splitting up between group companies of the same entity. So now MLI says that if there is artificial splitting up done by a group company, then it would still be considered as a P, and there are certain conditions which need to be looked at. So Ireland, Israel, Australia, and Netherlands are the treaty partners who have accepted it. From a dependent agent perspective, dependent agent PE, which we discussed, it was mentioned in the treaties that if you are an independent agent, dependent agent PE will not apply to you. Again, independent agent was typically an agent who was working for more than one company. But they said that if you are working for more than one company, but if all the companies are group company of the same group, then again it will not be considered as an independent agent. And the treaties impacted here are Israel, Norway, UK, Japan. So with this, I come to an end on the MLI provisions. Again, this is what we discussed earlier, that what all you need to look at post MLI. So I have 3 case studies. I don't know, I think I'm running out of time. It's already 3:35. So can I take this case study, or we can just keep it for now, Alpa or anyone on the organizer side? It will take around 5-7 minutes to take the case studies.
So Jitin here, if you could just take one of them case study, that should be good.
Sure. So I'll take the one on the Netherlands one. So this is one of the structure. Say for example, a US company has invested in Netherlands. Netherlands is a investment subsidiary, and that investment subsidiary has invested in India. So earlier pre-MLI, what we used to do was that we used to ask for a TRC if Netherlands. So currently Netherlands treaty is favorable. So if Netherlands company sells shares of Indian company to another non-resident, capital gains are not taxable in India as per India-Netherlands tax treaty. So now if Netherlands sells the shares of Indian company to another Netherlands company or another foreign company, then we used to ideally take a declaration that okay, this transaction is not, or we take a position that it is not taxable, take TRC from Netherlands to determine whether it's a resident or not. But now what will happen is that you also have to keep in mind there is a principal purpose test. Whether Netherlands company was set up only to take tax treaty benefits is something we need to examine. Where it's only an investment company, whether there was any commercial rationale of having that company. If it was only a investment company, whether it has multiple investment or investment is only in India, all these factors would become very, very important. So now with PPT test coming in, this needs to be
Okay, I am there now. Yeah.
So with this, probably this case study are self-explanatory. You can go through it, and due to paucity of time, I'm not taking it and just moving to my last slide. So typical challenges, as Nishant was highlighting earlier in the presentation, determination of withholding tax rate for company becomes very important because there are huge penalties and you can get into protracted litigation with the tax authorities. And also maintenance of records, because all this will come after 4 years, 6 years in assessment proceedings. So having records in place becomes very, very important. Documents, details become very important. How to deal with the bank on 15 CBs becomes very important. So in fact, what we have done for our clients is that we have created an automated tool which helps in maintenance of records, helps in digging out details after 8 years, 10 years on an online mechanism, which is helping our clients. And that's a separate topic in itself, which we can discuss some other time, or we can reach out to you. But with this, I conclude my presentation. Over to you, Jiten and Nishan.
Nishit, we have some questions like which are based on our day-to-day experience. So if you could just give an idea about your understanding how it should work for us, It will be a great help.
Sure, not a problem. I can take this one.
Yes. So my first question is, what kind of preparation does a corporate need to have with the recent addition of MLI coming in effect from 1st April 2020? I will read the second one as well because they may go hand in hand. How much in deep should one go with the paperwork while trying to comply with the provisions dealing with foreign outward remittance, or is it fine for one to just rely on the declaration and go ahead?
Sure, Nishant. So from a preparation perspective, one exercise which typically we do for our clients is that we look at all the recurring payments which they are making.
Okay.
Look at the countries where the MLI provisions are applicable
Okay.
and see what could be the possible impact on those recurring transactions of the MLI and whether we are adequately covered with the correct kind of documentation. If not, whether any changes are required in the PO agreements, whether any different kind of declarations are to be done. On your second question, see, while I agree on your point that as a company, how much deep you can go for a particular vendor. But there again, I will have to break it into two parts. One is if you're dealing with a group company, you would be more aware on the facts and the legal structure of your group company vis-a-vis a third party vendor. So I'm saying that from a group company perspective, there should be more diligence from our side as to whether the declaration which we are taking from the group company is merely a declaration or factually the declaration marries with that facts of the case.
Okay.
And for unrelated parties, it would be more to have a robust declaration in place. So for example, if you are, say, for example, buying goods from a Netherlands company for selling
Yeah.
it in India, and as a matter of fact, on ground, you know that you are only dealing with the agent and you've not seen the face of the Netherlands company or neither spoken to them, neither they are marked on emails. And still that Nether company is giving you a no dependent agent P declaration and you blindly rely on that, then it's your problem. Because see, you have not seen Netherlands company. You are only dealing with the agent. He's only doing all the paperwork. So how you can post MLI say that he is not principally concluding the contracts? Then you may need to get into slightly more deeper exercise. In specific cases where you are on the ground available or aware of the fact. So for example, your company has given a project to a particular company outside of India, and you know that the project is given to 4 companies and they are going to work for 60 days in India, and you as a matter of fact know that all part of same group companies because same tax team and other teams were negotiating the contract with you. So the anti-splitting rule which is provided under permanent establishment may come into picture. So as a tax professional, we all need to be aware of ground realities. So declaration is one thing, but if declaration is completely different than what the ground realities are, then we are at risk. So by and large, you can rely on the declaration, but if you feel on the ground that the situation is not the same, then you need to question. That would be my answer.
Okay. Okay, Nishit. Nishit, one more question which I think in our day-to-day business, many a times we buy a subscription to an international software or a tool using our debit credit card, and that is a very easy transaction. We can go ahead. But what happens at a later point of time when we are undergoing audit uh, based on this provisions of section 195, the auditor asks us for a tax deduction on such kind of transaction, and at the end, to get the benefit of such expenses, we end up paying the taxes from our pocket. How could we deal with this situation where we buy
Right.
subscriptions online?
Right. So see, typically what happens, I'll tell you, we've had this kind of experience with couple of our clients, and we have suggested them couple of process which companies can implement to avoid this kind of issues. So one of the process we had suggested that all credit card transactions should happen by an employee through company credit card. And the tax team was actually liable to be intimated by them of the transaction to be done. But we were sure that out of 100, 50 may intimate and 50 may forget.
Yeah.
So as a process, we have said that every month the company's credit card bill would be reviewed by the tax team, and basis that they will gross up and pay the taxes. so that they avoid the interest cost and the penal consequences. And now prosecution has become a very funny thing, whereby for even small offenses people were receiving prosecution notices. So that is a process we have set up. We've also seen in many cases how the entire thing was not getting complied with. So for example, someone was using the personal credit card and then it was claiming as a reimbursement. So company was ultimately booking it in the subscription ledger, but even though it was a credit card transaction, it came as a reimbursement from the employee, and there was no tax deducted, and there were challenges in assessment on that. So to answer your question, yes, the compliance is required. You need to build in the process. There is no other way to say that it is not applicable, unless you take a position that what I am purchasing is a standard software, tax is not applicable on that, then it's a different case altogether.
Okay. One more question, Nishit. We have instances when we are like doing multiple transaction with the same party. Like we are selling some softwares to them, and in turn we are supposed to pay some commission to them. We are not allowed the adjustment, or what we can say, the netting of between the two transactions. How would you see this?
So while it's more of a FEMA question, but just to answer, government or rather RBI has allowed netting off of purchase and sale transaction where their physical goods are involved. However, netting off of services payments or service payments against goods payment is not allowed under FEMA regulation. So it is not possible. And one of the fear or one of the reason for not allowing it is that, for example, just to give you an hypothetical example, today I have taken service from you of $100.
Yes.
But I want to inflate my turnover.
Yes.
So I'll say, let's do a transaction of $1 million, and you bill me something which is for 990, and net should come to 100. If netting off is allowed, this kind of transaction government is fearing may happen. That I do 100, you do 90, so net is 10, and our original transaction was of 10. So that is the logic intention. While I understand that in many genuine businesses this may creating a problem, but unfortunately our foreign currency is regulated, so we'll have to respect that.
Okay. And one last question which I have, like in case of repayment of ECB loan, I'm talking about the principal part, that is repayment is not a profit based transaction. CA certificate can be avoided, but the bank insists on the certificate knowing that it would be of nil values. Can't changes be made for such type of transactions which do not need application of withholding taxes?
No, so actually there is a law which says that, as we mentioned, Part D of 15 CB in start of my presentation, there is the transaction is not taxable. You don't require a chartered accountant certificate. However, I have seen that many banks are very conservative, and just to protect themselves, I have not made a payment where tax was required to be deducted, and they are blindly asking for certificate even for reimbursement, pure reimbursement in some cases. And we have had discussion and fights with the bank, but ultimately I have seen that client gives in and says that okay, bank wants it, let's give it, rather than breaking head, because banking has their own system, own processes, and that results in delay. So by and large, it's a banker's problem and not government's problem. Government has provided the law, and we've seen on the flip side, we have seen many Indian banks or many other banks which are allowing also. So probably the bank you may be dealing with, or whoever's query it is who is dealing with that bank, the banker's requirement would be such, because the law does not mandate that.
Okay.
And I've seen the moment they see a high value transaction, they want the comfort of a CA certificate.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah, those were the questions from my side. Like if we have questions from audience, Viral, how do we take it? We have
Yeah,
some
hi,
questions.
Jiten here. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We have one question from audience. Mr. Vijay is asking, can you please share contents of declaration to be obtained from vendor?
Yes, Mr. Wagmore, we can do that. We can engage separately on that, but broadly we need to look at which country, for which countries you are taking the declaration, what kind of clauses are applicable. So probably we can circulate my details on email ID, and probably we can touch base and see how we can help you on that.
Thank you, Nishit. Alpa, I would request you to give closing remarks now.
All right. To be honest, I'm not from an accounting background. So earlier I thought that this may be a little boring or uninteresting for me, but it was quite simplified by both our speakers here. So I think it was quite engaging because I could start understanding a few facts which I did not know earlier. We of course thank the NextDime team for partnering us and taking this forward. It is also very, what I found very interesting is it's not only about getting the details of what MLI consists of, but also about how you should have the correct procedures and processes and not abiding by that, and what implications could it have on individuals and businesses, which was very, very interesting. I once again thank Nishant for being with us today from Decors,
Thank you.
Nishit for your presentation, and all the companies which have participated. If you have any questions, Nishit or even Viral, can they still write to us, and could there be a possibility of sending them some information, or maybe even this video presentation to the participants?
Yeah, sure. We can get them to write to us, and we will be happy to respond.
All right, then that's it. And thank you to all the speakers, NextDime, and the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone.